And I would like to introduce Carolyn Winchell. She's one of our, I think, 2018 Master Gardeners.
Right.
Class of 2018. She is great. She's got a lot of good information, and she really enjoys teaching. So go for it, Carolyn.
All right. I'd like to talk today about planning to plant. There's a lot of details that go into that I certainly hadn't thought about years ago. And I just wondered how many of you have spent time in the late winter looking at seed catalogs and dreaming of the fabulous things that you could grow and enjoy, and ended up disappointed at the end of the season. I have a lot of times. So I'd like to share a little of our journey, my husband's and mine. We arrived here from two different parts of the country a long time ago now, and we discovered that growing things in Southwest Washington was different than we'd known before. When we moved here, one of our neighbors said to us, well, you're going to have to plant the very earliest variety of sweet corn that you can get if you want any. And if you're going to be growing tomatoes, you're going to have to grow them under plastic. I didn't know that. Where I grew up, we had a tomato outside my bedroom window that grew all year round. That was quite a new thing. Well, part of what we were encountering was that we're at 1,000 feet. Somebody's laughing. We're at 1,000 feet elevation, so that makes for a shorter growing season, colder temperatures, and fewer plants we could grow. We discovered, too, that living in Southwest Washington, rain delayed a lot of when we could plant. Another neighbor, longtime gardener here, had said, don't even try to plant before June 1. So we took that as the way it was supposed to be for a long time. That's where we started. And then we happened to run across an early edition of Organic Gardening. And in that magazine, it introduced, I think it's called Rodale's Gardening now, it introduced us to a number of concepts that we weren't familiar with, whether it was especially raised beds. That was a new concept to us. It introduced us to putting a lot of organic matter in our soil. And that's when our gardening here began to change. We discovered with raised beds, with lots of organic matter, and I do mean lots. The fairgrounds used to give out free pickup loads of horse manure. My husband would go through, they'd load him up, and he'd come and dump it. In the winter, even with a heavy clay soil, by the time we got done with all this organic matter, we had crumbly soil even in the winter. We found the beds were drier and they warmed up earlier. Then we ran across the Northwest Maritime Garden Guide, the earlier version of that. This has become our planting Bible. In that, it encouraged us to plant year-round because in the mild climate that we're in, we can grow things that many harsher climates can't do in the winter and late fall and early spring. And it introduced us to increased yield, a longer growing season, more variety. So I'd like to talk first about some things that we need to consider if we're going to expand our harvests and make them more productive. First of all, location. As we discovered, at 1,000 feet, there are things we simply couldn't grow that those who are downtown in Longview, for example, can grow, at least not the same varieties. We noticed that one of our neighbors has their house is in a dip, and coming down from the hill, as you walk along the road there, you can feel cold air going through. So we began to notice the implication of microclimates as well. Is there sun? Do you have a lot of trees? Is there reflected heat? What about wind coming through? Are there ways you can shield your garden from wind? Is it a south-faced area? And cold pockets. Another thing that we learned was timing. We need to know the last and first frost dates. Now, Art Fuller, who's on here, he's somebody meticulous at logging. For me, that's pretty hard, but I do kind of try to keep it on my phone, and we kind of have a sort of a best guess. Those last and first frost dates are especially important for non-frost hardy varieties, and the days to maturity that we choose for seeds. Now, timing. We can help our timing by having raised beds so the soil dries out faster. We can plant faster by using cloches or black plastic or other ground cover, row covers, hoop houses, growing plants inside. There's a new element in timing this year that I think is important. I was listening to a report on National Public Radio this week, and they were talking about the increase in gardening that happened last year and is happening this year. That they talked with seed companies who said they are experiencing 5 times the demand that they have experienced in the past. Baker Creek Seed said they had added a 50,000 square foot building and it wasn't enough. Another company said their seed packaging companies were not able to keep up with the demand. One man said he had ordered 60 varieties of seed and 20 he had not been able to get. What they said on the report is you will be able to get the seed, but you may not be able to get the variety you want. So I would say if you want a specific variety, order early, and I think your chances will at least be better. Timing, choose maturity dates for your area. If I choose one that's going to work in Southern Oregon, it may not work here for me. That is one of the things that I love about Territorial Seed Catalog, is because they do grow in Oregon. They have categorized, they give you information about the seed growing time in our areas, as opposed to in the Midwest where other catalogs may have a different maturity time. So it gives you more accurate seed time. It is also my other go-to book as far as when to plant, how far apart to plant, what kind of fertilizer, how often to fertilize. It's an immense resource, and I just save all those catalogs for using. Now, another element of timing is when we fight slugs. Greg from Greg's Garden told me several years ago to put out slug bait in the spring and in the fall. And he said, if you do that, you get them when they're hatching and you get them when they're laying eggs. And that made a major difference in the amount of slug problems we had when I remembered to do it. Timing affects when we plant a new crop and when we do a cover. Then there's succession planting. It gives you more use of your garden. So if I'm planning on planting a crop that will be finished in July, I can plant something else in that space and make better use of my space. It also helps with cross-pollination issues. If I'm planting 2 different kinds of corn that are not compatible, if I can plant them 10 days apart, then I will be able to plant those without impacting my crop quality. And of course, succession planting again falls into fall and winter gardening. It allows you to try more varieties and later varieties for longer harvest. And then there's the issue in planting of space. Some of us may have acres to plant. A lot of us don't have a lot of space. Raised bed gardening has made a lot of difference in that. Intensive gardening, which really looks at conserving all the space in there. My first acquaintance with that was square foot gardening. And that just allowed you to create a green mulch, as they call this, so you have less weeds because the whole area is covered. And that has worked really well. Then subsequently, we became, Alice, maybe you can help me with why this bar is showing up and it's in the way of my screen. At least it's showing on my screen.
You can move it, just drag it off.
Okay. Somewhere. It doesn't want to go away. Well, I guess I'll stick it, I don't know what to do. Can I get it to the side to drop it down? Sorry.
It looks okay on our end.
Oh, does it? Okay, because
That's
it's hiding my,
Yeah.
I thought if it was showing on there.
No.
When we took a class in organic gardening from a man who had been head of the agriculture department at La Sierra University several years ago, and he talked to us about the concept of planting in triangles. He said when they studied planting in triangles as opposed to on a square, you were able to, for example, if the spacing was 6 inches, to be able to plant one plant on each corner of a 6-inch triangle and then keep rotating it. That he said that increased the amount of plants they could plant by a third. And I have really liked that. This is one of our lettuce beds that we planted on triangles, and then we did companion planting also with onions, which may repel pests in a number of varieties. Why is it not moving? My screen is not moving now. Let's see. I'm going to go back here a second. Okay. And then transplanting is another way of planning your garden so you can get more yield. If you are able to start plants inside on the windowsill in the greenhouse, then when your catalog tells you that it's safe to plant, or Frost tells you it's safe to plant kale, for example, you can plant that at the time it says it's safe to seed it, which really bumps up your planting time. These are some of the things we started with, the little mini greenhouses. We put them on the windowsill and planted into the little peat pellets, and found that I had things that just didn't sprout very well in our cold soil, and I could start them earlier and put them out earlier. Of course, the greenhouses and hoop houses and lights. If you don't have a greenhouse, this is an option that we have. And that is, last year we put out a table in our basement, and my husband wrapped it with some aluminum foil wrapped insulation, which reflected the light, and hung some lights over top. We grew a lot of plants there. It gives you an early start on your garden. Another concept to think about is seed saving. On the National Public Radio show that we heard this week, one of the gardeners was saying, I plan to save seeds this year so that I can barter with people next year, because he's still thinking there may be shortage. But regardless, seed saving is becoming more of an issue, and Alice is going to talk about that in a little while here. I don't remember the date for sure, Alice, but because there's a decreasing variety of seeds in varieties, it's one way of saving and preserving some of the seeds that are out there. This is popcorn we grew last year. And for that reason, consider open pollinated seed. It'll be designated with an OP, usually by your seeds, which tells you it's not a hybrid, which means that it should save true to the kind that you just harvested. You should know what you're getting next year. One other thing that we discovered for hurrying our garden was a garden fork, because when we wanted to get going in the spring, it was often too wet to till. At that point, when we discovered a garden fork, we discovered we could loosen our soil and plant much earlier than the times when the soil was dry enough for us to garden. Now I'd like to walk through these are timelines, these are pieces of timelines from the Maritime Garden Guide. And in that, every month it gives you a guideline of what you can sow outdoors, what you can sow under a cloche, what you can start indoors. It has vegetables and flowers as well. I'm not going to go to the flowers at all. And these are just pieces. If I list something in this month and then it goes on into March, April, May, if it says carrots now, I may not have carrots listed again, and just giving you some feels of those. And I can't recommend that Maritime Garden Guide enough. So here in February Outdoors, which I would have never thought about before we started all this, it said we could plant carrots, arugula, radishes, garlic, cloves, shallots, potato onions, fava beans, snow peas, shelling snap peas. So here are some of our peas that we started from transplants. Here's a cloche garden that you can start during that time, oriental greens, broccoli, cabbage, arugula, spinaches. This is in February. Cilantro. And then, excuse me, as I mentioned, growing things indoors gave us the ability to get better germination, and it gave us a head start on the plant dates. March garden, lettuce, onions, parsley, oriental greens, spinach, garbanzo beans, chickpeas. We planted last year for the first time, probably the last as well. This is March. We planted, this is May 15 from bok choy that we planted from transplants in March. This is our March 3 garden. It had kale, sugar snaps, and fava beans planted and growing. Those were all transplants, including the sugar snaps, because we discovered we got to jump on those too. Broccoli, we started in March, and this is May 27th. Also in this garden, you'll notice we have overwintered parsley and carrots, as well as collards. So for March, in your cloche, carrots, parsley, broccoli, cabbage, arugula, beets, lettuce. This is row cover. If you're not familiar with row cover, floating row covers can be very expensive depending on where you buy them, or pretty reasonable if you do some looking and buying at some length. It can raise the temperature of the crops underneath by 3 to 5 degrees, so it's well worth the difference. We grew eggplant 2 years ago in our garden under row cover until into November. These are garden huckleberries we grew this year the first time. They taste terrible when you eat them fresh. They're actually not good until they get to be a dull blue, purple color, and then they're no good until they're cooked, and they make great jam and syrups and so on. So that was fun. We started that indoors at the same kind of timing as tomatoes, which were a great time to start indoors. This is something we want to try this year, and that is growing growing ginger. And they say to grow it in a broad bowl and a flat one, and then when it gets warmer, because it's a tropical plant, then you can put it outside. So we'll see how that goes. This is April. So here you're doing dill and cilantro and chives and broccoli and beets and potatoes. April again, cloche garden. And then I'm having trouble seeing I guess I'll pull this down here. Late April, cabbage, scarlet runner beans, lamb's quarters. Ooh, my screen's not moving. There. This is our April 20 garden. We have fava beans and sugar snaps that we planted from transplants. And we used this paper row cover this year as a trial. It was wonderful at preventing weeds. I found it hard to work with just in terms of putting transplants through there, and it did provide a great shelter for slugs. Corn. If you have trouble growing corn outside, then I would start it inside. We had started peat pellets before last year. Art Fuller mentioned to us of starting it in a 4-inch pot the last week of April, and then planting it outdoors in May or the first week of June. This is the first year we've gotten a really good harvest from corn after having done that. This is May 13. Our fava beans and sugar snaps are doing great. And my husband complained about the fava beans and the sugar snaps being planted so closely. They did great, all of them, all year.
They take over.
They are tall. May, okay. Again, you can plant your pak choi outside now, and your New Zealand spinach and your snap beans and sweet corn, potatoes, so on. This was kale that we had transplanted, and now it's May 3. These are our beans and some of our sugar snaps and cilantro. We put a row cover over top of our green bean trellis, sugar snap trellis, just to warm it up some. And there was a notable difference between the edge that you can see to the left and inside. Cloche, summer squash, winter squash, melons, cucumber, basil. I would have to say for us, starting basil inside and starting melons inside by seed, because for us at least they grew out. It took a long time growing, and I haven't successfully grown melons yet, so I'm going to try that again this year. And Territorial has some really good early ones that are supposed to be good quality, so we'll try that. This was our greenhouse year before last. In May we had eggplant. That's the tall ones you see, and tomatoes beyond. And we had basil, and that really, of course, hastens your growing season. And then Billy Bevers was telling us she had fresh tomatoes the other day in her greenhouse, so she had started early, really early. This is May 6th. Lettuce, onions, beet, cilantro, parsley, potatoes. Obviously, the potatoes weren't from transplants, but the others were. More of our beans that we had under row cover. And so this is a list of the things that we had going by May 13. Most of them pretty good size by then. Kale, collards, cabbage, beets, onions, carrots, cilantro, parsley, potatoes, chickpeas. The chickpeas are the little, these guys right here. They're kind of a little almost ferny kind of plant. Sugar snaps, blue pole, black cocoa, bush beans. First time we grown those because there were no pole beans, black beans. This is an Italian sweet pepper. They're wonderful. Jerry, we grew them in the greenhouse, and something that I just discovered, I think some of you probably already know, is that pepper plants will live several years. So if you have them inside in a greenhouse during the winter, you can keep on growing your peppers. So you can have some, we have some peppers in the greenhouse now currently. We just have a small one, but we do have some. Then Jerry last winter got the itch to grow squash early. So he started it in downstairs and then transplanted it to the greenhouse. And by May 21, it was taking over the entire greenhouse. So with that, he planted it outside at April 21, which I thought was pretty impressive for squash. We might have pushed the envelope just a little too far because that's what it looked like on May 6. But on May 13, whoops, I skipped. On May 14, it looked okay. This is July 1st, and this is a red curry squash we had on July 16. July 6th, sorry. If you're looking to save space, I would consider doing bush, like bush zucchini, bush delicata, whatever you can get in bush, just because of the vast difference in space it makes in your garden. Potatoes. These were some of our transplants, and this was corn and popcorn that we had on July 6th, ready to put out. This was more interplanting. These were tomatoes and hoop house Jerry put out in July, and kale and collards June 7. They had grown pretty well by then. Zucchini July 22. June outdoors, you can sow cucumbers and summer squash. These are our fava beans and sugar snaps the end of June. They were head high. Early tomatoes, you can get some earlier and enjoy tomato harvest earlier if you begin with some early ones and then add in your later ones for other things as well for variety. So July, now we move into fall and winter gardening, planting. And now you can plant carrots, parsley, green onions, overwintering broccoli. This last year we planted, I think it was called Four Seasons broccoli from Territorial that had 4 different maturities so that we could have some growing throughout the winter. It would have done better if the deer hadn't eaten them. Cabbage, cauliflower, turnips. See, there are all these possibilities that you can start for extending your harvest into the fall and the winter and into the early spring. This was July 13, Jerry was harvesting a cabbage, and then we could replant in that area for a fall and winter garden. July, here's late July, there's other things. We planted daikon radish last fall for the first time, and that was really interesting. It's supposed to be good for loosening soil too. If you've seen them, they're these big white roots that you see in the market sometimes. I had run across it first with someone who made a Thai soup dish, and they cook up kind of like a maybe like a turnip. I'm not a fan of turnips, that milder than that. They got a nice texture. Anyway, so here's some possibilities. Again, you will find all of these lists in the Maritime Northwest Gardening Guide. August, again, more of the same things. You can plant some of those. You can plant successions of those so that when one harvest is over, another's coming. Something else I would say about planning for fall and winter gardening is you're not going to have the growth rate that you have during the summer because you don't have the amount of sun. So therefore, probably plant more plants than you would for the same amount of time that you want to harvest, because it is going to be a slower growth. But that way you can plan for more and enjoy them more. This was companion planting we did with basil and broccoli several years ago. And some things about companion planting say that basil will repel pests from broccoli. This is our sweet corn that we planted. This was August 23. And we happened to use Bodacious, which is an 80 to 90 day maturity, and latte sweet corn from Harris Seed. I think Harris Seed is mid-America, so 68 days may be too short a maturity for a year. If you plant those a little bit apart, you should be able to use them. That was the best crop of corn we've ever had. And I planted popcorn. Here's popcorn, and I planted some sweet peas in there. So, I think it's fun to experiment, especially because you can do close planting and you can try new varieties. This is celery. It's the first time we have planted it in the garden, and we started it inside early, probably early March, and they're slow to start, but then we planted them outside, and I found that the stalks got bigger as they went on over time. We've had celery all winter long. It's been kind of fun to go out to the garden and just cut off a stalk of celery or two. Sometimes in a hard freeze, I've been told it will freeze down. For us, that didn't happen this year. We had snow, and some of it turned less firm, but there was still quite a bit that we could use. This is butter crunch lettuce. It's a winter lettuce. We planted August 31. Next time I would plant more, and I would deer-proof it because the deer came through and yanked up, I think, 6 of the 7 plants and ate off the other one. So these are the chickpeas we planted. This right here, I decided to move back. This right here is a chickpea pod. They seem to be single pods. They were pretty small. I don't think I'd bother with them again. September. Here again, more choices, more of your different mustards and just things you would plant in early spring, you can now plant in the fall. This is some of our corn, popcorn, and more things you can plant late September, including overwintering grains, which you may want to use also for a cover crop. This is also a time, if you take up some of your crops, you may want to plant a cover crop so that the soil's being enriched while you're not growing a vegetable crop. These are black cocoa bush beans that we harvested last year. That were fun. Those are cool. You're supposed to wait until they're fully dry before you harvest them, which was hard because it was raining a lot last fall, part of that time. October, you can plant garlic, shallots, multiplier onions, snow peas still, fava beans, overwintering grains. We harvested humber squash in November. And in November still, you can plant garlic and fava beans. This is my picking on the 1st of January. It was leeks, daikon radish, carrots, and kale. There's a daikon radish, and here's the soup I made out of them. So it was a nice New Year's celebration. This is also what happened. This was the consequences of planting the daikon radish with no row cover, and that was a fresh area, so I don't think that it was infested, but next time I will put row cover over them so that root maggots can't get there. And Alice said to make sure that we plant them in an area that's not infested for carrots or that. This is how our sugar snaps did that I planted that I told you a little while back. They didn't look very good in January 1st. I don't think I would try it that late again where we are. But the celery and the cilantro, here's celery and here's cilantro, still doing nicely, and it was 28 degrees for several days here. February 10, we had kale from our planting in the spring, and January 13, here's our celery. January 18, this is newer kale. It was fall sprouted, and carrots and leeks, and some netting to keep the deer out of it. And this is because I didn't bother to put out slug bait in the fall. So we had holy kale and beets, February 10. Collards from our spring planting still. Garlics. This is overwintered broccoli. So I guess I would encourage you to go for it. Try some new things. Stretch out your garden year. Look for the opportunities to do fall and winter harvests and earlier spring harvests, and just plan to succeed. Okay. Anybody have any questions?
There's a question from Nancy Smith. Is there a good guide that explains how to harvest various leaf type plants? I mean, I've never known whether to pull the entire plant or individual leaves and to continue to let it grow. And you mentioned pulling individual sticks off the celery. So does that mean you can leave the plant in the soil and it'll continue to grow?
Yes, and that's what I do. I tend to cut leaves off of my lettuce heads so that the lettuce continues to grow. I guess my better authority would be Ruth and Michael McKee from Willow Grove Gardens. He's now passed away, but they would pick lettuce from the head rather than cutting the whole head. Then that saves me from planting until the lettuce starts to go to seed.
I agree. If you keep pulling off the leaves until it starts to bolt because of the heat, it'll last a lot longer.
Yeah. And I don't know of a guide for greens. Do you, Alice?
No, but I think those are pretty good guidelines. Just pick. Don't pull them out. I don't unless if I grow too many in one space, I'll thin it by pulling out whole ones so that the others can get bigger. But mostly, I just pick off leaves.
Sure.